If nothing else, you won't be in these exact same life or death situations that are depicted. Or maybe you are. And if so, then hey, at least you're interesting. Howdy friends, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new, welcome, and I hope you enjoy my content. Today I'm talking about a couple of witch movies and how it shows teenage girls being demonized just for being teenage girls. I guess people are just scared of them for whatever reason. I wouldn't know, because I am one. We're going to go back to my absolute love and adoration of Anya Taylor-Joy's acting by taking a look at The Witch from 2015. Love the movie, seen it a few times by now. And I'm going to talk about a newer movie called A Coven of Sisters, or Akelarre, which was released on Netflix in America just a month or so ago. Both are period pieces that take place around the same time, with The Witch taking place in America and Coven of Sisters taking place in Basque Country. They both center around teenage girls who are coming of age while there is worry of witches in the background, and it gradually becomes the foreground of the plot since they're witch movies. In both movies, the teenage girls in question are accused of witchcraft without any real hard evidence. Both movies take this witch theme in completely different directions, but I do think that it tells us a lot about how society felt about young women maturing. Arguably, not a whole lot has changed in the aspect, and I will take a look at a few other movies that take place closer to today with similar coming-of-age themes, like The Craft, or American Horror Story Season 3 Coven, which I know is a TV show, but it still fits with the witch theme, and Jennifer's Body, which I know Jennifer's Body isn't a witch film, but it does take being a teenage girl and growing up to a certain extreme that I think these other movies do as well. So a huge spoiler warning for all of those movies and parts of American Horror Story, maybe. And I'm all ready for talking about witches since I have a sort of witchy type of outfit and makeup look. I pulled some inspiration from Google Images. And I have a couple of familiars. One is made of flesh and blood and fur. This is Lizzie. I don't think you guys have met her yet on here. And she is my pride and joy. And then we have another familiar who is forged in yarn and stuffing and a crochet needle. Little Alfred back there. No hat, unfortunately, because it's the middle of spring and nowhere near Halloween, and I live in the middle of nowhere, so gotta work with what I have. So let's kick it off with a brief overview of witches in general and their historical meanings in a feminist context. I was able to trace back some of the history of witches and the term itself thanks to an article from the Coalition for Women's Identities and a journal from Maggie Rosen, both of which will be in the description so y'all can take a look at them. So the rough origins of witch comes from the gender-neutral Old English term Wicca, according to the Coalition article, which means wise one. It was later derived into witch, specifically targeted towards women. Though it was through the Coalition article that I also learned that boys and men were killed during some witch trials, since some people believed that witchcraft could be hereditary and passed down. Both sources point towards witchcraft being associated with women who were able to heal and didn't always fit into the stereotypical mold of homemaking and being a good wife. So either you were able to be a wife and submit to your husband, or you were a witch. And if a woman in these times was getting just a bit too good at healing or something, she was considered a witch and needed to be tried. Oh, and if someone that you were healing during that time died, which probably happened a lot since I don't imagine medicine was very great in the 1600s, you were considered to have bewitched that person and killed them in that way. There just wasn't any winning, and these women were demonized for not being married or not having kids or being a woman of color in slavery who was at the wrong place, the wrong time, like Tituba. And this was a case where even women would turn on each other, and they contributed to the mass imprisonments and deaths during this time period. All because some women just didn't quite fit the proper mold of wifely duties. Even today, if a woman doesn't fit in with our own mold of how women should act, we call them witches or bitches or both, even, especially if they're in positions of power. And I'm all for critiquing those who are in those power positions, but if that's all you can say about them, then that says more about you as a person. And I could go on all day about how the term witch hunt is being used in tandem with cancel culture and the Me Too movement, but I'd rather continue to sing my praises for Anya Taylor-Joy. So if you haven't seen The Witch, it's a movie based on various folklore about witches from the time period, which is around the 1630s, so close to the Salem witch trials. And you should definitely watch this movie if you're into period pieces and horror. It is a horror movie, but not in a jump scare type of slasher sort of way. There is some blood scenes, but that's not the point of the movie. Personally, I love it and highly recommend it, and I'm about to spoil, all of it. Anywho, it follows a Puritan family who is kicked out of their colony for their ways of practicing religion. They set out to live their own life as a family unit of a mother, son, and 5 children. One of whom is Thomasin, who is the one I'll focus on for the bulk of this section. Obviously, trying to live off of the rough land and feed a whole family is tough during this time period, and times only get more difficult when the baby Samuel is taken away while Thomasin watches him. They end up blaming a wolf in the beginning, and they leave it for a little while. As the movie progresses, it becomes clear that money is tight as they sell prized possessions and family heirlooms, and the parents talk of sending Thomasin away as she is a teenager and starting to mature, and believe she can get them money by working in another family or being married to someone with more money. And they are doing this because, well, she is starting to mature, if you can get what I'm laying down here. And this is something that her younger brother, Caleb, also takes notice of throughout the movie. It's probably the creepiest facet of the movie for me personally, just the awkward, slight incest. But Thomasin is really just doing her best through all of this and doesn't want to burden her family, though it's clear she obviously doesn't want to go off and serve another family and leave everyone that she knows and loves. The further we get into the movie, though, the more the family turns on each other, specifically on Thomasin, believing her to be a witch who sacrificed her baby brother and caused the death of her younger brother Caleb later on. All the while, the twins play with a goat named Black Phillip, and I'm sorry, you're a religious fundamentalist and you're gonna have a black goat on your farm that the kids play with and do weird ritual type of stuff with in a horror movie? What'd you expect, bro? And that's not a knock on the kids. Come on. All kids do weird stuff like dancing around and singing silly songs and all that sort of stuff. It's just part of being a kid. But Thomasin hasn't done anything except, exist, and everyone thinks she's a witch. And I know some people theorize she was a witch the whole time, but I'm of the mind that in the movie the intent was to make her a witch by turning her family against her, and then giving her no choice. But that's not quite the point here. The point is that the family sees a teenage girl slowly growing into womanhood, and it sets off all the red flags in the world for these people, to where they insist that she is a witch. And the father ends up with death by goat, while Thomasin kills her own mother in self-defense, leaving her all alone because the twins were taken in the middle of the night, presumably by the witch who lives in the woods. Obviously, since she's a teenage girl, she can't just go back to the colony and explain everything. And since the family could barely keep up their farm, there's no way she could manage to do it on her own. So Black Phillip, who's the devil because duh, goes up to her and says exactly what I'd want to hear when my family turns on me and ends up dead.
What's that like the taste of butter?
Like, bro, you could have gone with anything else. Chocolate, apples, berries, ice cream. Did they have ice cream back then? They probably had something like ice cream back then. And you choose butter. But anyway, she ends up becoming a witch in the end and is able to fly with the women who are presumably part of her new coven. So in this instance, the witchcraft going on was very real and ends up being a means of survival. Roger Eggers, the director, did admit that he didn't set out to make this movie with a feminist message or anything like that, but as he started writing the witch movie, he realized that it couldn't not have any of those messages behind it. Though it is still a situation where Thomasin didn't have many options, and this was easily the best one for her. But we can see that she wasn't a witch for like 97% of the movie, and she still got accused of witchcraft for having bad luck, having boobs, and just existing in the way that she was. And this was a reason for most witch trials. Young women were existing in ways that were deemed unacceptable by society, and they were punished for it in ways that they had no option out of. I remember when I was little, I read that they tested to see if you were a witch by submerging you into a freezing lake or river or something like that for an amount of time. And if you died, you were innocent and couldn't possibly be a witch. But if you survived this, you were considered a witch and then got burned at the stake. So, like, there was no breathing room for these teenage girls, or adult women even, to just be themselves. And if you were just hanging out with your group of friends, forget it. So this is one that you probably haven't seen unless you're really up to date on Netflix and you're looking in the right places. A Coven of Sisters, or Akelarre, is originally a Spanish movie that came out last year and got dubbed for English and released on Netflix just a month or so ago. I stumbled across this gem with my parents who just like watching different horror movies, specifically foreign horror movies. Again, similar to The Witch, I loved it, and it's great if you love period pieces and a suspenseful type of horror and an impending sense of doom. We see these Catholic Spanish inquisitors going around looking for girls who participate in the Witches' Sabbath, which they determined involves girls running around and dancing in the woods while singing some specific songs in the Basque language. And while they're in the Basque country for most of this movie, which is the area between where France and Spain are, so almost every girl in the region is considered to be a witch to these guys. Our story centers around this group of girls who are captured by these men and are held hostage in a prison cell and are interrogated for witchcraft. At first, they turn on each other because they think they're being betrayed by someone within their group of friends. And then when you see the questions and the wording of them in the interrogation scenes, it's really just stupid circular questions that give you no leeway and have no real sense of logic or real explanation. Like, they'd ask if a girl was a witch. The girl would say no, and that they didn't know anything about witches or witchcraft because, well, they didn't. And then they would get the fantastic, brilliant comeback of, well, how can you know you're not a witch if you don't know what a witch is? There's no winning. We see clips of the girls dancing around with each other and singing and doing so after dark. And they're teenage girls, so when I watched this movie, I was immediately like, they're not witches, they're just being girls. What girl doesn't dance around at night with their friends? I know I did stuff like that. Maybe my experiences aren't universal, but it was pretty standard teenage type of stuff. Anyway, they realize that there's no convincing these men that they aren't witches. All they can do is buy themselves time by pretending to be witches and to explain the witches' Sabbath, which is exactly what one of the inquisitors wants, and all of the men in general are just curious about what this witches' Sabbath is and what it entails. And it's very clearly a bullshit story with the wild things that one of the girls, Anna, says and describes. Like saying Satan enters her body through her asshole. That sounds so fake, and if I could find a good clip of it, I would put it in here, but I can't. It was really funny to watch. And the main Inquisitor dude, he just eats this stuff up. And it took me a minute to realize that when the girl was asked to describe Lucifer, she was actually describing the main Inquisitor guy. But as soon as I caught on to that little tidbit, I was here for it. It was really, really creative and I really liked it. However, they didn't buy themselves very much time because they're all soon sentenced to death, but not before the men decide to see the witches' Sabbath performed at night in all of its glory. Which ends up just being these girls dancing around, singing Basque folk songs that make no sense to these men, and since when do folk songs make sense? Have you actually listened to the lyrics of lullabies? They're wild. And as the Sabbath comes to a close, the girls try to run away and free themselves, and ultimately they are cornered to a cliff and they choose to jump off of it. And they leave it with an ambiguous ending, but it's pretty safe to say that they all jumped, likely to their deaths and drowned since they were all literally chained together. But this movie differs from The Witch in that the witchcraft in this movie doesn't actually exist. It's just a general lack of understanding of the Basque culture and a demonization of teenage girls just doing their thing. All Anna had to do was her best when Harry met Sally orgasm scene impression, and the main Inquisitor dude is just off his rocker. Never mind the creepy age difference. I'm sorry, if anyone should be burned at the stake, it was the main Inquisitor guy. He was creepy as hell for the whole movie. He even freaked out his own religious accountability buddy guy. Once again, we have girls who weren't left with many choices because they were to be murdered a few hours after they jumped to their deaths either way. It's a tragic story and is something that happened to many Basque girls during this time period, all because they decided to dance around with their friends singing songs at night without men around. There's one point where the Inquisitor asks why they danced around without any men to watch, and just rolled my eyes because this dude really thought that these girls and young women existed to be ogled at by men and nothing more. They couldn't dance for fun or with their friends or for just because reasons, which is something I think we still see a lot of in society. Girls and women end up being put in a position where society expects them to exist for men's consumption. Not at all times. Things are obviously better than the 1600s and the witch trials, but we still see it in comments about what amount of makeup is acceptable or what type of clothing to wear, and it gets tiring. Sometimes you just want to chant songs in Basque with your homies and eat some food. It's not that deep. We're not all trying to summon the devil or whatever. We're just trying to have fun. If you're like me, you've seen The Craft a million times. It's just got that cool aesthetic and the plot's really interesting. This is a case where the witchcraft is very much real, though depending on what you think of the movie, only one of them really has powers. And I haven't seen the sequel or reboot or whatever that's called, so I'm not going to cover it here in this video. This is a movie where witchcraft is being practiced in the 90s, which isn't quite today, but they're never once put on trial or almost killed by others purely because of the fact that they practice witchcraft. In fact, it shows these girls growing and bonding while becoming powerful. Of course, some of the girls become power hungry and then they gradually turn on each other, but that aspect of the movie is a video topic for another day. The point is, we can see that witchcraft is more accepted in pop culture during this time period. These ladies are allowed to grow and mature without being killed and hunted by society in general, though they are still demonized for how they treat each other. We also see this in American Horror Story Coven, where all the girls are vying to be the next supreme witch, which ends up sort of taking them all to different levels, and some of them take it a little bit further than others. But ultimately, they end up deciding to work together and bond as a coven, and in the end, we have a really happy ending with everyone who's alive at the end of the season getting along with each other. Still, they are vilified by the next door neighbors, and there are some pretty vicious young women in there who show more stereotypical witchy type of characteristics. This is where Jennifer's body kind of ties into all of this, because it's an allegory for a teenage girl being sexually assaulted and dealing with the aftermath in the form of a revenge horror movie type of deal. I'm not going to get too in depth because then this video will be too long, but the popular and mean girl Jennifer is literally demonized as she becomes a boy-eating succubus after her murder, but it's implied to be an assault. She isn't allowed to just exist and be herself, and as a consequence, neither is her friend, Needy, who is also impacted by all of these events. Especially when Jennifer is seen as someone who exists for the consumption of men, which is accentuated by her being played by the very talented Megan Fox. Both of them are affected by this, and it alters the way that they both learn and grow, which shows us how being a teenage girl is still really difficult. And, well, as someone who is still a teenage girl, yeah, it's pretty rough. So, in conclusion, if you're a teenage girl, good luck. Don't get burned at the stake. Being a teenager in general is tough, not even just for girls, but if you're sorting out your gender or sexuality, forget it. If you don't fit into the cookie cutter mold, it can be really tough to find a place for yourself. But remember, all that matters is that you're comfortable with who you are. And if you have a couple of really good ride or die friends along the way, then even better. And remember, while you're figuring out yourself, so is everyone else around you at just about any age, I'm sure. And these movies can sometimes remind you that, if nothing else, you won't be in these exact same life or death situations that are depicted. Or maybe you are. And if so, then hey, at least you're interesting. If you enjoyed this, I really hope you'll like this video and maybe comment your thoughts as well. And if content along the lines of media analysis is up your alley, you should click that subscribe button and ring the bell so you can see what I come up with later. I hope you have a good rest of your morning, day, or night. Bye.